Hi, this is Chris Haughey. Thank you for joining me on Create with Chris. Today I will show you how to paint date night using some impressive techniques. I had so much fun painting this design and I was amazed at how simple it was to create. I'm excited to share these unique touches that absolutely proves that using a little bit of paint makes a big difference. Be sure to watch to the end because you won't believe how magically it evolves. You don't need talent to look great, so grab your brushes and let's get started. I am using an MDF surface and treat it the same as I would if it were a wood piece, so I am sealing it with multi-purpose sealer. Just a quick coat using my 3/4 inch oval wash. Make sure it's on there nice and smooth, and I do grab a stylus to put it in the hole. It just kind of helps keep it in place without scooting all over and I don't get finger marks on it. Give it a quick dry and lightly sand it. This will ensure the paint's going to adhere well. It will be more gentle on my brushes and it'll give me a smoother finish as well. So I am base coating the entire surface with baby duck. Same technique, just long smooth strokes. Do start toward the middle and brush toward the outer edges. That makes sure that there's no paint that's going to drip or run down the side edges. And if the side edges are nice and clean, then you don't have to worry about touching them up when it's finished. I am going back and putting a second coat on the moon area just to brighten it and make it a little more opaque. And I'm using my oval wash, and again you can see that I'm just brushing from the center out, using that rounded edge of the brush to create that rounded edge of the moon. Just makes it really nice to be able to get that surface. And going back a third time and putting another coat on the moon because I want it to be super bright. I didn't go clear to the edges because I do have shading and highlighting that I'm putting on. I decided to go ahead and add another coat on those outer wings because I thought they were just a little too patchy. Loaded my brush with red spice and I'm using my number 10 Fantastic Filbert to kind of just slap that on there, carefully going around the moon. I don't want this to be smooth and even, so you can see it's a little bit, I wouldn't call it blotchy, but light and dark. I've loaded the toe of my 1/2 inch Awesome Angle with soft black, just lightly going around the outer edges to deepen that and give it a little bit of a nighttime look. And the paint is very thin. Soft black's a strong color. I want it to be dark but not super strong. And the paint is a very washy. I have a fair amount of water in my brush, so after I lay it on the surface, I can move it around very easily, and you can see how wet it is. Do let it dry and then go back and add a little bit of this. This is that new Cherry Merlot. It's absolutely a beautiful color. And I'm adding that just to give a hint of a purple, kind of a twilight look. And you can see how that changes the color without changing, it just changes the tone. I guess it doesn't change the color so much. Still using that technique, just a super soft, fluid application of paint, just letting the brush kind of float it around. I do want it to be a little heavier and darker down the sides and across the bottom, so I did go back and add a little more soft black just on the side edges and the bottom. Now I just wanted to clean up the rounded part of the moon so it's nice and round, picking up a little bit of salted caramel just to float around the outer edge of the moon to start to give that some shape. And you can see it's not a lot of color. I'll say it over and over and over, a little bit of paint makes a big difference. It's all in how it's applied. And I think we often want to be heavy-handed and it's not necessary. This is Snow White and it does look a little bit stronger. Once it dries, it'll be much lighter. My highlight's from the top right, so I want to strengthen that area, blend it down into the moon. Now I'm going back with a little bit of red spice just to enhance that bottom kind of left and bottom area of the moon to give it that nice glow. I love how this background looks, and to ensure that it's not going to go anywhere if I make mistakes, I'm applying a layer of ultra matte varnish. I love this. It's going to protect my background. If I need to lift my paint and redo something, I'm not going to dig into that beautiful background. It's what I call a safety net. I use this often. It's a great way to keep that background without worrying about it. I did transfer the main lines, not a lot of detail. Loaded the toe of my brush with Lush Green. This is my 1/8 inch Awesome Angle. And I shaded around her face, mostly the forehead, the nose, and then blend it out toward the left side of her head. And I wanted to add her hands the same color. I did line where the broom handle is, and then I'm going back with that same Lush Green, just doing the basic shape of her hand. Details will be added later. Bumped up to a 1/4 inch Awesome Angle to float in the different sections of her clothing, her cape, her dress, her where it goes around her knees, and to create this look of gauzy tattered layers of cloth. There's no wrong, it's just a combination of light layers of different colors, very loosely layered, and then the detail that is added as we get further along, it just comes together almost magically. This is a very limited palette. I believe there's only 7 colors, so it's just kind of fun to watch it evolve. Adding a little more Lush Green to kind of straighten up her face, bring a little more color in, define her hands just a little bit more. Now I'm going in with just a hint of soft black. And remember, this is such a dark color. It's not going to take much. If this first layer is super dark, then the layers over top are not going to resonate and be visible. I wanted to add just a hint of red spice on her cheeks, and I'm doing that with the 1/8 inch Awesome Angle. Switched over to soft black, the Epic Script Liner. Just a simple line for the eye and the mouth is all that's needed. Adding a little more shading to define the bottom of the chin, any areas that are just a little bit bland or not really showing well. This is a great way to add them without a lot of definition. Using soft black and the number 2 Radical Round. The hat is not solid black either. It's just a loose layer of paint. Again, if it's super heavy and dark, then the other layers over top just kind of get lost in that heaviness. She's flying, so everything just needs to be loose. Don't worry about detail at this point. What I'm concerned about is where her sleeves are going to flow and hang from her arms. Make sure they're draped over the arms. Where her knee is, it has to have that little bit of a bump in it where her knees will be. And more can always be added. I am basing her legs in with a very loose, very light wash of red spice. And her shoes are soft black. And again, that's just with the number 2 Radical Round. It just holds enough paint that makes it really nice to add that soft kind of a wash tone base coat without being super heavy. And you can see the yellow kind of glow through. The only thing you have to be aware of is direction of brush strokes so it doesn't look choppy or blotchy. So if the strokes, for example, on her stockings are all up and down, then even though that yellow shows through, it's going to work really well. I lined the stripes with soft black. Now I have just a little more soft black on the toe of my 1/8 inch Awesome Angle just to clean up those edges, sharpen them up. Painted a baby duck buckle. Just sometimes that little bit of detail makes such a big difference. I added a highlight down her legs with Snow White. Now I'm going in with Cherry Merlot It's a beautiful new color. It's kind of a violet purple. It just adds that hint of color without being overwhelming. I wanted to paint her cape like one corner of it was flipped up, so I just lightened the Cherry Merlot with a little bit of Snow White, probably about 50-50, but you can see what a nice color. Adding white really makes that a nice lavender color. Just going back and forth now to sharpen up, and it's adding a little more darkness, and just be very light-handed. It's super easy to go back and add more. Because I did that safety net with the ultra matte varnish, I can go back and lift out any paint that I'm not happy with, and I use my Mono Zero eraser. I just dampen the tip of it. It will lift out the dried paint super easily, and with that safety net varnish underneath, it's not going to do anything to that background. At this point it looks a little bit messy, but if you hang in there, all of it will come together really nicely. I'm just going back very carefully, very loosely, very randomly adding hints of color to create those layers just a little bit more, paying attention to the flow of the fabric, making sure all of it is kind of swept up in the same airstream so that it looks like it is flowing along. Now keep in mind, it may look a little dark, but there's always, with each layer that is placed over top, it creates those under layers that are a little more strengthened. Now adding just a little bit of highlight. This is Snow White. Shaded the back of her legs with soft black. I kind of bounce around between highlights and lowlights or shading just because it really makes a difference to add them consistently as opposed to finishing one area completely. I haven't dealt a whole lot with detail. Now that I have those dark lines in, I can go back with, I'm using the Epic script liner and a little bit of thinned Snow White just to sharpen the edge of that flipped up cape. And you can see all of a sudden that is very defined just with those simple little strokes. Doesn't take much, but if they're well placed, all of a sudden, look how that flips up. I can add those ragged ends with just a little tiny stroke, and it is amazing. I've never ceased to be amazed at how it just comes to life almost magically. Darken some of the shading. Be careful, don't overdo it. It's so easy to do, just a little bit. That's why I always say keep your paint thin and light, because it sometimes just that little touch is all that is needed. Now I'm looking at her sleeves. I want to add some rolls of the fabric over her sleeves. They have the long cuffs that kind of hang down. Her knee's going to be behind that. I don't want it to be a bunch of little lines. I want it to be layered fabric. So kind of look when you add the floats in that they're consistent and not short pieces of fabric, because this is a long dress. There's her knee. I wanted it to have a highlight on it. This is a long dress, not little pieces. The ends are pretty tattered. She's worn the same outfit for quite a while and flown a lot, so the ends are all tattered and jaggedy. So right now I'm just looking to define those highlight areas, the top of her sleeves, her knees, and then I can work on the tips. And you can see where some of those points are just kind of dull and rounded. Using the chisel edge of my 1/4 inch angle and just going into sharpen. And that really helps areas to pop out. Not necessarily adding shading and highlighting, but just defining around areas is going to either push it to the back or bring it to the front. brightening her hat up again. After I painted her hair, I realized very little of her hat brim will actually show, but it's much easier for me to have it there and then not have to worry about having an empty spot. Look how that little bits of Snow White, how that really starts to create those layers and folds. It's just amazing. This is what I think is the most fun. Just going in to highlight certain areas. If you highlight everywhere a lot, it kind of loses its impact. A little bit on the toe of the shoe, the top of the shoe, a little bit on that buckle to make it sparkle. That's all that's needed. Not a lot of tiny line work, just a few little specially placed highlights and shading. And that's with soft black just to enhance like her heel and the back of the toe so that they're not, they need to have a strong shape. When I add the shading in on the dress, her legs looked a little bit bland, so I can add shading there. Now I have loaded my Epic Script liner with Red Spice. I love to do the hair. Thin it down and just let it flow out. And my little witch has curly, curly hair, just really blowing. And this is going to take some time. Don't try to do it heavy and thick. Use the Epic Script liner and just let it flow. I like to put a lot of wiggles in it. This first layer with just the Red Spice is to fill in around her face and fill in around her hat and for general placement. Once I get it filled in, I'm going back with Cherry Merlot. And you can still see a lot of moon yellow or a baby duck showing through. I let that be some of the highlights, but I decided that I wanted it to be a little bit darker, so I'm just adding more strokes of that Cherry Merlot. Gosh, it looks so pretty with that Red Spice. Once I get the general hair in there, I can go back with some highlights. I've just picked up a little bit of Snow White. I tried the baby duck, but it blends it into the moon, so it does not work. Don't be afraid to try different things. I thought maybe that would really work out well, but it does not. There's enough of that hint of color that's kind of showing through, so using baby duck in the hair did not work at all. So it's just basically Red Spice, Cherry Merlot, and then a little bit of Snow White. And there's lots and lots of layers. Once I get it in there, then I can go back in and add those little wispy ends. And those little wispy ends make the detail look really like you spent hours on it. If you have any comments, please be sure to leave them in the comment section below. Everything I used is available, and all the links will be listed below as well in the description. See, I can use Mono Zero Eraser. That's one of my best friends for removing any areas that I'm not happy with. And it doesn't matter if the paint's been dry for a minute, a day, a week. You can still remove it with that Mono Zero Eraser. Going in with Baby Duck to add a few strokes for the broom. And after I did that, it looked too spindly. Working on the handle. If you mix persimmon, or I'm sorry, Red Spice and soft black, you get a really nice brown. Decided the broom needed to be a little thicker, so I did go in and bump that up with a number 2 Radical Round just to thicken it up, give it a good base, and then I can go in with the Baby Duck and add some real fine stroke work for those broom bristles. Thin that paint down. If the paintbrush is dragging, add a little more moisture to the brush. The paint needs to just flow off nice and quickly and smoothly. A little bit of Snow White to highlight the top of the broom and the broom handle and the bristles. I'm going to deepen the bottom edge with a little bit of soft black, and it's just a back and forth balance until it really begins to stand out. Where the broom tip is over in the dark area, that needs to be highlighted a little bit more so that it shows up against that dark background. Going in with a little bit of Snow White to brighten up the hands, the top of the sleeves, and pulling that down a little bit on the shoulders, the flipped up cape. I try to do all my highlights consistently, sort of at the same time. It keeps them very well balanced. Adding a little bit of soft black to divide the fingers and deepen the shading on the bottom left side of the hands up against the sleeves and between the hands to separate them out. Adding just that touch of Snow White on the top of where the sleeves overlap the arms, huge difference. And just pull that right over the hand and down the sleeve. The top sleeve was a little bit short, so I just made it a little bit more billowy and add some shading in there. Very easy to add onto. Highlight the top of that back sleeve, brighten those hands up a little bit. Once you start adding highlights, you can see where areas are lacking. It just needs to be balanced. So the highlights need to be consistently bright in all of the areas that are going to reflect light, as well as the dark areas need to be consistently dark. I was going to take this next part out, but I thought you might find it interesting. When I design something, I use the white chalk pencil to kind of sketch on my surface. I don't have a pattern. I make a pattern after I'm finished, but this way I get a good visual on spacing and how it's going to turn out. And what's nice about the white pencil, it will erase with water, so I don't have to worry about trying to go in and get rid of any tracing lines. Works out really well for me when I'm trying to get an idea of how placement's going to be, and makes it easy to work with. I'm using my Epic Script Liner and Baby Duck to do just a real thin border around the edge. I think I did go back maybe 2, maybe 3 times to get the darkness. Anytime you use a light color, especially yellow, over a dark background, it's going to take 2-3 coats to get good coverage, and I wanted this to really stand out. I'm using my number 2 Fabulous Flat and Baby Duck just to very carefully, it's almost like calligraphy, pull the flat of the brush down. You can use the Epic Script Liner for the skinny parts, or you can use the chisel edge of the brush. And as long as the brush maintains that position, it'll work out perfectly. I really like doing lettering with flat. The secret is consistent pressure. If you push a little bit harder, you're going to get a fatter line. If you run out of paint, probably the first thought is to push a little harder to get more paint out of the brush, but just keep in mind that needs to be at consistent pressure to get a consistent line. And I'm going over the bottom third with a very light wash of red spice. Just going to give those letters a warm ombre effect. Using the same technique, keep the brush flat and straight and just pull it over the bottom third of the letters. I thought the top needed to be brightened up, so I used Snow White on the top of the letters to give that, and probably the bottom third is darker and the top third is lighter. White always looks so much brighter until it dries. And it doesn't take much. After this did dry, I decided that middle area needed to be reinforced a little bit more. So I dry brushed Baby Duck again, just to kind of blend those 2 sections together. Just a real simple solution. Always add a dropped shadow to the right of the letters, and this is with thinned soft black and number 2 Radical Round, just slightly to the right and below. What a huge difference. It's always these little touches. that really set the project apart and make it look just a little more professional. And look how dimensional that creates, that really impactful result. Just takes that little bit of stroke work to add that on there. Adding some bats, and this is with my Halloween helper. These are a very soft, almost a dry brush. They're very distant. There will be no detail. So I just put a light, even coat on. Maybe that baby duck yellow is a little bit filmy through the bats. It just needed that little bit of movement in the background to kind of finish it off. Went back to brighten up the broom after I added the letters. You know, pay attention to the little details because this is what people notice. Adding that little bit of detail on the brooms to brighten them up. And I didn't do it on the film, but a day after I painted this, I decided that broom was a little bit too intense. So I did do a wash of salted caramel over the broom, just a very light wash. Defining highlights. This is my favorite part. Watch the magic, because this is where everything just really starts to look filmy and tattered and flowing. I can bring that out. Just that little bit of paint. Look how that starts to just, it kind of creates a gauzy effect. Sharpen those little pointed tips that are blowing out. Look how just, I can add extra little tatters that weren't there that just help to make that look very full and very flowing. And this is with Snow White. Because it is thinned as it dries, it won't be an intense, solid, heavy line. Brighten those little fingers up. Anywhere that an area needs crisper or sharper details, this is the magic. This is my very favorite part. Look how that, all of a sudden, that just really starts to pop and stand out. If all the bright whites are not equally balanced, my letters looked a little dull, so I just went back to enhance those with a little more white to help those stand out. And I put a little tiny dip dot of Snow White in each one of the four corners just to make that pop. Now I can go in and erase those tracing lines, or I can just go over it with a wet brush. I did varnish the ornament with ultramatte varnish, and then the only thing left to do would be to add wire, decorative cording, or ribbon for hanging. I hope that you will be able to bring some of this technique into your everyday painting. It's just a fascinating way to add dimension with layering of washes of color. It's just magical and amazing. If you're enjoying this video, please hit the bell, like, and subscribe. That way you won't miss out on upcoming tutorials. Let me know what you think of this project. I would love to hear from you. Everything I used is listed in the links below. Thank you again for joining me, and I look forward to our next painting adventure together. And remember, a little bit of paint makes a big difference.